What's the plan, Tesla? Welcome back.
CyberSpace.
Empirical training. Do you know what I mean? So like empirical training. Welcome back.
Hello and welcome back to the CyberSpace podcast by Empirical Training. And it's so good to have you back. If you already know us, you know I'm Josh. You know that on the other side of this call, we're going to have AJ. If you heard last week's, you know that this is a continuation of our previous episode where we dive into the British Library compromise, the ransomware compromise, which they have so graciously shared an in-depth breach report on exactly what happened. And in this episode, we're going to be digging into the attack sequence. So last week, check that out if you haven't already. We went on all the key points of the timeline, when they were made aware of the compromise, the steps they had to take afterwards to identify the full scope of it, notify the right authorities when it came to the data that was lost. Over 600 gigabytes of data was stolen. And today we're going to look at exactly how they did that. How did they gain entry to the network? How did they find the data and steal the data and then go to sell it on the dark web? And how did they get to a point where they were able to deploy ransomware in what appears to be a short period of a few days at this point? No spoilers yet. As always, well, not as always, but part of Empirical Training, one of our key members is AJ. He's joined me today. He's our incident response specialist. My name's Josh. I'm a product specialist and a former security analyst and threat hunter. Used to work alongside AJ, but he stayed really close to this incident response process, working for financial organizations, huge banks, as well as some more startup and banks entering the financial services arena. But basically, he works at the kind of the highest level of stakes, right? Financial services are always being targeted. A lot of stuff going on, a lot of motivation for threat actors to try and steal financial data, personal data, or hold them ransom and extort them because they're probably going to be able to pay some of the biggest ransoms. So that's why he's here. He's going to share his expert insight into what he thinks might have happened. He doesn't know what happened. I haven't let him read the report. I said, hey, let's do this blind. I will read it all and relay it to you so we can hear his kind of fresh perspective of what he might have done at different stages. He also asks some great questions, which leads me right on to the kind of the next sequence. You can really see how an incident responder thinks through AJ. So thank you very much, AJ, for joining us. And let's pick up where we left off last time and dive into what we know about the British Library attack sequence and ransomware gang that infiltrated them. I would love to know the exact exploits they used, but unfortunately, this is what they say. Forensic investigation analytics records indicate strong likelihood that the criminals actors initially gained access at least 3 days before the incident became apparent, but it's unlikely that we'll ever get a definitive answer because of the exact timing of the entry into Library's estate and the overly destructive nature of the attack. So the timing, chat said this earlier, they do it outside of business hours. Yeah, they did it at 1 o'clock in the morning was when they first saw an alert that was linked to it. And a lot of this stuff seems to happen in the middle of the night. Are you aware of, I might say this wrong, Rysida?
The group, the ransomware.
The ransomware group, yeah.
I have heard of them, yeah. So they were the group that who claimed responsibility for this attack, were they?
Yeah. It was on, they didn't work out it was them, but they shared it on their dark website, the victim disclosure piece. You can see in chat, the best backup is one that isn't online anywhere. And yeah, you can have cold storage where you store stuff offline, but then that's also quite hard to kind of do that frequently. But yeah, absolutely right. That would be an improvement here. But even in this case, they did have offline start backups. They're still trying to put them back. So it makes things easier, but it's not really a full insurance policy. But good call out, chat. So
yeah, I was looking at the Rysida here. So they first observed in the May of 2023. So fairly new ransomware group.
Here's a question for you, Andy. Why do we call them ransomware groups or ransomware families? And we kind of say that it was the Rysida's entry when actually they're a ransomware as a service group.
Okay. So we're thinking that they sold the ransomware rather than actually did the attack.
Yeah, so Rysida they developed the malware for people to use who've gained entry and kind of deploy it themselves. So it's a really good bit of malware. As we'll see later on, it's great at finding data to exfiltrate, but it's not necessarily that group who gained initial access and hacked in. I just think it's quite lazy that we kind of seem to attribute these ransomware families, the malware families, as the kind of groups who are going out there and doing the full thing. They're just the kind of, you wouldn't say, oh, there's been a big shooting recently by the AK-47 group.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, yeah. That's why I would say that the Ricida then is the family of ransomware, isn't it? I don't know why they're saying that Ricida is, but even Sentinel-1 here have got Ricida as a ransomware group. So I don't know unless they operate.
Scroll down, they go on to explain that they developed the malware and they look they're quite actually slightly immature or not immature maybe, but they're not the most advanced. There's a lot of pieces missing that they would expect in more of an established, like a Lockbit ransomware, for example. But yeah, it is ransomware as a service, and it even describes you pay with it with Bitcoin. So yeah, this is people coming through. They have to already have a victim who's already compromised, and then they say, can we use yours? Here's our money, and here's the victim that we've got. So they might even share. Normally, often it's a sharing of the proceeds. So if you've got a good victim, they'll be like, okay, great, 50-50, let's have a milli each.
Is that maybe why they contributed to the Ricida as the group? Because they're actively using their own ransomware, is it, rather than just selling it off to somebody?
I don't know. I don't think we'll ever know, but I think it sounds like they're partnering with people. But yeah, I just thought it was an interesting thing as I was researching this, and that AK-47 group was what made me think, hang on, that's you don't blame the gun. Well, guns don't kill people, rappers do.
I was just about to say.
Sorry, I should let you say that. So the next piece. So now we're going into some of the nitty-gritty details. I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened. I'm going to actually get my other notes up. I've got two computers here, so I'm literally flicking between mice. The breach sequence, my first note is they'll never really know, but the first instance of compromise they identified was 3 days prior to the ransomware payload being deployed. So October 28th, they knew about it. At least 3 days prior, they were
3 days prior to the ransomware
entry.
group. So I think we've kind of lost connection there with Josh. He's going to try and join back now, but yeah, what we'll do is wait for him to join back and see. He's just got a new PC, to be fair to him, and his network card is not that great, so he's having a few issues with that. I did tell him to wire it in, but he. I
did wire it in.
We lost. Oh, you have wired it in. We lost you there for a couple of seconds, but he's back.
I got conned with a motherboard with an awful Wi-Fi card, and I've now wired it in. But I'll have a look at it. This is my first time using it.
That's all right. Yeah, we lost you when you were starting with the dates. I think.
Okay, let's start from the top. This is the benefits of driver updates can help. I have updated the shit out of my but thanks, Pierre. And when I looked online as I did more research, people were just saying that the card I've got is a bit crap. But hey, Ethernet is the best anyway. I've got it running through the mains right now, which I probably need to try and find a better way, because I think I've noticed it's better than it was, Andy?
It is better than it was. Yeah, you were in slow motion last time we did one.
Yeah. So this is the joys of doing it live. So who was the other member we had? I've noticed we had two before, but now we've got one again, and then a PS.
PS staying strong. Yeah, I'm not too sure who else was in there.
Cool.
Hopefully.
Let's pick it back up.
Yeah. Where were we?
So October 28th is when they identify that the ransomware payload has been delivered. Everything is encrypted. Everybody knows that they're breached. 3 days prior is the earliest instance of compromise that they've identified. And they're unsure if they would gone further than that. I know that the kind of record time for a full ransomware from point of entry to kind of encryption is usually it can be 24 hours. But usually it's more around the 3 to 5, 7 day mark, particularly if you have to move laterally through a network. And if you're talking nation states, they'll take ages to do it really carefully and low and slow. This one will seem quite quick if it was only 3 days, but they do point to the fact they have a really bizarre network. They say it's bizarre and complicated. I think what they're trying to tell us is it's a flat network that isn't hugely complicated.
And it's old as hell.
Old as hell. Lots of technical to say. I think that they were clearly they were able to move quickly throughout all the server estate. And I get it. This is a British library that has lots of different organizations, different kind of functions within it. So they're not probably all singing from the same hymn sheet, and it might be difficult to get everyone to kind of buy into IT initiatives. Not so difficult now. Now they understand the need for those.
Yeah, I was going to say they're probably not, like you say, it's a flat network, so they're not segregating the network at all. It's probably quite simple to move from host to host, and yeah, it kind of makes sense. A lot
Yeah,
of businesses are like that.
which is and that's there's a lot of kind of that's obvious lessons within here, things that everybody knows are a best practice. Again, not blaming British Library, have sympathy for who they are and how difficult how it must be, but I love the fact that they're pointing out this is what happens if you don't do that thing everyone talks about. You might have heard it 100 times.
Yeah,
It says don't segment your network, apply zero trust principles. This is actually why you should do it. And the next piece is the first evidence of lateral movement was seen within 3 minutes of their initial entry that they had detected. So very quick to move on to lateral movement that quickly. 2 hours.
Did you say what the initial entry was? Or,
It doesn't say. It doesn't say. But my impression is that it was a user account that was compromised from the beginning. So it suggests phishing.
15
2 hours later, the IT security manager who was on duty, and this is occurring. This is at 11 is when this first happened. So 2 hours later, we're looking at about 1 o'clock or half one, and we're getting this alert to the security IT manager, and he investigates it. It looks like possible malicious activity in the network. They don't say exactly what the detection was. I wish they did, but he blocked the activity, which if I read a little bit later, it looks like disabled the user account, which is why I'm thinking it was account compromised at the beginning. And he extended the block as he investigated more, because there was an automatic block, I think. And we ran an antivirus scan, so to see if there's any vulnerabilities. No results. So I thought, oh, I don't know what it is. But it was interesting was that there was something blocked that activity, right? That alert was a block. And so a great point. We talk about how you need to investigate your blocks like you investigate your detections.
Yeah, definitely.
This is another example of why that's important, because it might be indicative of an ongoing compromise, not, oh, they tried something that didn't work. To be honest, I think that's, unless you're looking at WAF detections, WAF blocks, with web application firewall, which is like on the perimeter, you're probably not, the blocks aren't unnecessarily signs that something bad is happening.
Yeah, but like you say, internally, more likely something you want to investigate.
Mm-hmm. So 6 hours later, and so this is about 7 a.m. now, it was escalated to the IT infrastructure team. Now, I don't believe that the guy sat there for 6 hours thinking, oh, what should I do? And then escalated. I think that they probably came into the work at about that time. I don't think they had a full 24/7 piece. So this kind of shows about them trying to attack in the middle of the night when everyone isn't working, or there's less people working. The IT infrastructure team investigated further. They couldn't find anything, so they reset the password and they unblocked the account. So the account's back up and running. The report said that they thought this was a reconnaissance attempt rather than a precursor to the major attack than the actual attack. I don't really know what they mean by that. I think it was
That's part of it. Yeah, I would say so as well. It doesn't really make sense what they say it was a reconnaissance attempt, unless they're just saying that, well, I don't know, they're in there, aren't they, if they've got access to the account rather than trying to do some recon. So yeah, I'm not too sure.
Recon's normally outside. You can do recon internally, but it's normally when you're like doing ICMP scans to see what's accessible, rather than actually trying to move on with a specific account. Or maybe they had a few accounts compromised and they thought, hey, let's try different techniques and see which one gets blocked. Maybe that counts as reconnaissance.
Yeah, maybe. Good point, actually.
So the day of the discovery, so at this point, they still don't think there's something. Incidents like this happen. They can be forgiven to thinking, oh, it's probably nothing huge. We haven't seen anything obvious. But what happened? The next thing that they were aware of was the ransomware encryption, the data being exfiltrated. On the day of the attack, the internet provider who worked with them, I think it's one of their managed providers, and they had a lot of managed providers, which may have been contributing to the risk here, identified 440 gigabytes of data leaving the library at 1:30 a.m. on the day of the realization. So they seem to extract most of the data out the night of, and then probably encrypted it that night of, actually. And it was only when people logged on in the morning did they realize, oh, everything's gone and we can't log in. So yeah, that is. I can go. I'm about to go into a little bit more detail, but what do you think right now? How does that resonate to you? Does that sound familiar? Is that have I disappointed you? Is that exciting? Is that interesting?
No, that's a really good. It's a good write up of the breach, and it's they've clearly tried to go back through and make a good effort to understand what went on. I like the idea that the IT admin that he reset the password and he run a antivirus scan to see if there was anything on there. Unfortunately, that's not always going to work if the antivirus vendor hasn't detected a potential
Mm-hmm.
that malware family yet, or maybe the attacker just hasn't deployed any malware. So that there was attempts to try here. So it's like the British Library can't you can't fault them for actually trying their best with what they had under the circumstances, which is quite nice.
And there's always a little bit of luck, right, in some of these things. You look in the right
Yeah,
place sometimes, and sometimes you don't. But I think it's indicative of the kind of the different levels of complexity that come with securing an organization like this with all the old stuff and the realities of, oh, I don't want to get someone out of bed because it doesn't seem like anything's actually wrong. I'll wait till they wake up in the morning, but at which point if they've been on it earlier. But then again, they didn't find anything at 7 a.m. So maybe I'm completely wrong there. I do
yeah.
have more detail about the initial point of compromise. Well, I know what the asset that was compromised. We don't know the exact entry vector due to the damage and the anti-forensic measures that the group took
Yeah.
to hide their tracks. But it was a terminal services server. Was the earliest compromise identified. So this was installed as part of kind of a remote access server for for a managed service provider to kind of log in remotely and make changes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Um, I think it replaced their old RDP server. And so see here, the terminal server, I'm quoting here, the terminal server has been installed in February 2020 to facilitate efficient access for trusted external partners and internal IT admin as a replacement for the previous remote access system, which had been assessed as being insufficiently secure. So a little bit of irony there.
Yeah. Oh, so the remote access terminal, that's not how they got access initially. They just managed to get access to that.
It could
Yeah.
be. That's the
Could be.
earliest part of compromise. So that's I kind of gave you the little rundown of what happened. Now we're diving into more detail after the fact because that's what happened at the time. Now
Yeah,
post breach, when they've been researching, we've had more forensic teams on site and instant
that makes sense.
response teams. This is what they've uncovered. So yeah,
Okay.
the fact that this is a super attractive target. It is used for remote access. It's used by IT admins, so it's people could be logging into it from all over the place. Probably, and that's not going to
Yeah.
look suspicious if you log in remotely. And people are expected to take pretty powerful actions from this server as well. So you can see why the lateral movement was so quick. Um, if if they've gotten into a remote access server used by IT admins, I'm guessing they compromise an IT admin account from the offset to kind of
Yeah.
facilitate.
I can imagine a host like that it's probably only got admin accounts on it that have the highest level of privileges rather than using least privilege on a specific account to do a specific
Mhm.
maintenance action. So yeah, that's quite common actually, where you have a managed service company with access to a particular network, another company's network, and if they get compromised, then subsequently then that company is going to get compromised as well. And like you say, the level of access is going to be extremely high, so they're going to be able to move around super quickly.
Mm. And we talk about this. Well, I talk about this in school quite a lot. When people see commenting, "Oh, what do you think would be the most dangerous thing for this?" I love talking about supply chain compromises because I think they're so interesting.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
yeah, technically, we don't think that they compromised the service provider and then passed it on, but they did use a kind of that trusted delivery mechanism of the third party server to do this. You mentioned the fact they probably had a really privileged account straight away that had access to everything. They state that they do have good segregation policies for user accounts, not for their network, and they do
mhm,
apply the principle of least privilege. Um,
okay,
but they suspect that multiple accounts were compromised, multiple different credentials were compromised for lateral movement, and they don't know how. Phishing or brute force, they're not sure. I would suggest maybe using something like Mimikatz, dumping local usernames and kind of cracking them offline is probably if you're on that server, you've probably got loads of kind of local. And loads of local information about the user accounts you could use to try and get hold of them. And now here's a kicker. if your user account's been compromised, how could you make it a million times harder for me to compromise that user account?
Say it again. If the account's being compromised, how to make it more difficult to
So
compromise it again?
I managed to get hold of, so I've brute forced the password or I've phished the credentials.
Mm.
Should I be able to get into an admin account just off that?
No, you shouldn't be. No, you need multi-factor authentication at least, and maybe even two sets of authentication sometimes to get into that particular account. Yeah, you don't want to just be relying on one factor like a password or anything
Mm.
like that. I think that's what you were alluding to, is it? Unless you've got
Yep.
another one.
No, you nailed it. That is exactly what happened. No MFA. So another kind of wow, wow. That was
Yeah.
MFA is very is everybody knows that it can protect like 99% of credential attacks, and credential attacks are actually the most common vector for breaches. Servers are the most common assets, most compromised asset, and
Mm.
web apps are the most compromised server. This is an example of a web application because it was connected to the internet. And then 75% of all web app compromises are through credential compromise. So and all that information is from the Verizon DBIR 2023. 2024 has just come out. I'm yet to read it. Maybe we'll do an episode on that soon. But I'm pretty sure it will show similar trends. So yeah, credentials are so important because they're so powerful once you get them. And MFA is a kind of a no-brainer. Like you said, Andy, something you know, password, something you've got. Maybe it's a YubiKey, maybe it's your
Yeah.
fingerprints. Although wouldn't do that myself.
Yeah.
And or your mobile phone, and your multiple three-factor, four-factor, even better. But obviously, it's annoying, right? People don't want to do it.
Yeah, I always picture like in like they're setting off any nukes or something. As you always picture in the cartoons or in the films, there's always
Yeah,
two keys. You always need two keys to access that nuke, and the same with an admin account. If you need to get into that admin account, you need two forms of authentication. Even separate people authenticating together, sometimes that's difficult because if it's a small company, and in this case, they might not have a lot of employees and they want to do some updates. They don't want multiple employees trying to
mm.
authenticate that one account. But yeah, that's the way that I picture it. 2000.
Yeah, I like that. It spreads out the kind of the points of compromise, the points of failure, I guess. So
Yeah,
the nuclear example, I was thinking of Putin, right? If he gets really annoyed one day at how the Ukraine is going, he's like, I'm going to launch some nukes. Hopefully, he's got other people who have to have keys to join him. Although
yeah,
maybe the dictator's not the best example of someone who shares his nuke keys.
yeah. I was going to say he's probably got them all on one key ring.
Yeah, around his neck, he's got like
Yeah.
five. So there's another statement here. I won't read it verbatim, but they basically said they do have MFA elsewhere. Things like
Mm,
Teams and Word, email, and I think that's why we didn't see any of the cloud services get compromised. Right? Those are very easy to deploy MFA. They say
mm,
here it's very difficult for them to deploy MFA. They don't say exactly why. They say it was decided that this time that connectivity to the British Library domain, so the domain that the compromise occurred on, that this terminal server is connected to. Would be out of scope of MFA implication pending further renewal of the library's infrastructure. So they were saying it's too hard, it's too old. When we upgrade this stuff, we'll then look to implement
yeah.
MFA. And
I was going to say it's probably too old, isn't it? Some of the older operating systems probably don't even have the ability to set it up.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. I mean, but if they've got SAML authentication, then often I don't know how the older stuff does have that, but you can often use like a single sign-on service, kind of extra steps. Use the MFA in the single sign-on, and use I think it's
yeah,
SAML,
that's true.
simple authentication,
Yeah,
ML.
I guess how it depends how old they're going back because it's probably they're just authenticating straight to the domain controller, aren't they? That's probably
Yeah.
they've got set up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's old school, and this is the part of the lessons of the, like, even if you got little bits of old school in there, look at the devastation that can happen. Only the cloud stuff was really safe because that was completely segregated. Here, I'm
Yeah.
sure there was some newer stuff they had in their messy architecture, the flat network architecture that probably did have MFA enabled. But hey, all it takes is one weak link in the chain to break it.
And I think it's important to say that even with the new architecture, it's still possible to succumb to a breach. It's all about how you set it up, and that's why in cybersecurity jobs such as engineers, system admins, and things like that need to have that cybersecurity mindset when you're setting up these systems. Because even with an older system, maybe there were possibilities for them to set up MFA. They said it was difficult, but maybe it
Mm.
wasn't impossible. But they just decided to delay it. But
Yeah,
maybe
try
things like
harder.
that. Try harder, yeah.
Try hard is the message. We get it with our realities, but this is why you as security professionals listening to this, you can't accept the losing those battles.
Mm.
That's idealistic. I get it. You might have to pick your battles, but MFA is one that I would die on if I was a security program. So Andy, I think it's interesting. They go on to list out the additional. They did because there was no MFA here, and they did realize that was a risk. They did take additional control steps to make sure that they could harden or mitigate risk on this server. They don't go into a whole lot of detail. They do mention they include copy and paste prevention because I know that some old, there are some exploits that can use the clipboard there, but also hardening of security settings to the recognized Center for Internet Security, so CIS standards. CIS offer a load of kind of baseline minimum. Ironically, one of CIS requirements is MFA, but they've all the other ones.
They can do that one.
Yes, they would have had monitoring on it. They would have hardened the operating system, assuming that it wasn't too old to do so. But obviously, it wasn't quite enough. And they do take security assessments, including penetration tests where appropriate, which I highlighted. So I think that's quite interesting. That who did your pen test, man?
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing. They
Maybe
might
they
have
did.
maybe just had Joe Bloggs down the road who's used Kali to run an
Yeah.
Nmap scan, and he said, "Yeah, don't worry, you're fine."
Well, maybe they did find it, and it was just that was why it was acceptable. I don't know. This
Yeah, that's true.
says a lot, but it can't say everything. I'd love to sit down.
Yeah.
With them. But yeah, good lessons to learn.
Oh, that
Okay.
could be good, actually, couldn't it? See if you could get representatives from specific companies that get breached to come on and chat about it.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder. I think probably the whole legal and the PR teams
Yeah,
that have
that's true.
written down versus you could say anything. I do some of these kind of engagements for work, and I've been briefed before. Here's what you can say, and here's what you can't say, and I've wanted to say what I think is the right thing to say, but I can't. I have to use the corporate line. So yeah, maybe we'll get there. Maybe that's our mission: fostering better security culture. Of it's okay to talk about
it's okay. Yeah. Come and chat to us. We'll give you a $20 Amazon gift card.
yeah, and tell you how good you are for doing it. Okay, so that is that's the real crux of it. That point of entry, that server. Again, sorry I don't have all the information of all the techniques that we usually do have to fill in some of the blanks, but also kudos to the British Library because you've given us a lot more information than we normally get from people, and I respect that massively. They then go to talk about the data exfiltration. So data exfiltration piece, we know how many, it's 600 gigabytes of records, but this is where I was quite impressed with Rissida group. So there's two ways they got the data out. The first one, they targeted, attack, copied records belonging to finance, technology, and people teams. So basically grabbing entire chunks of data that they knew, hey, if finance own it, it's probably something handy in there. And about 60% of the data that was stolen were these stealing from entire network storage places. They had it stored on premise, and they ripped it all out. They do say that some of the reason there was so much of this kind of stored and accessible and maybe not as encrypted as it should have been was because they had still old processes where they had to kind of input stuff manually, and some of it transfer manually, or had these manual processes, they say, across the network for data transfer. So it seems like the data was fairly vulnerable to being taken. Like I say, there are some databases like the electoral roll database, which I'm actually not too sure what that is. They didn't get compromised. It had advanced encryption. So the encryption the data at rest actually helped them not be able to see it or take it out and have it in a readable format. So encryption was a win here.
Oh, did they host that's the electoral roll that people register to vote, is it? I can't imagine
maybe that's what it is. That's what I thought, but I was like, oh wow, it can't.
Yeah.
That's 500,000 records, though, wouldn't it? So that was encrypted. So that was why we didn't have the whole population of the UK out there.
Oh yeah, it does. Yeah, so the British Library electoral register collection.
So again,
Also go. Yeah, the British Library holds the national set of current and non-current electoral registers, which form part of the 150 million plus items in its collections.
Well,
So is that more to do with what the items that they hold rather than?
yeah, I mean, I guess they hold any data of importance, historic or current. But
Yeah,
it does
that's
look
true.
like, tap on the
Yeah.
back. The stuff that they thought, hey, this is really important, this is really sensitive. It looks like they took extra controls there. So the electrical
Yeah.
roll, that would have been the UK. What's the population in the UK? It's at least 60 million, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Andy, I make you type everything up.
That's like 66.97 million, but that was in 2022.
Oh well, we're probably declining soon. The way everyone's getting older. But hey, the other part is the credit card information. I know I talked about in the beginning of this series of this episode, that the payment data card information wasn't stolen, and that's because of PCI DSS controls on there. So
Mm.
PCI DSS isn't crazy stuff, but it kind of requires you to monitor like daily logins and things like that. So it seems like they had better monitoring, they had better protections and mitigations in place. But I do question why PCI DSS couldn't be rolled out easily elsewhere. But anyway, that's
Yeah, makes sense.
and that's the data exfiltration piece. That's the first big part I missed out. 60% was taken from finding like hard drives and stores. Some databases weren't accessible because it was encrypted. The bit that was really interesting was they did keyword searches across the network for things like passport, confidential, looking for any data that kind of had these tags in it or
Oh,
this
okay, nice.
content. And they got lots of personal data because people were allowed to bring their own devices to the library. People were allowed to use their own memory sticks, so they literally got people's stuff straight off the memory stick by querying, pull back any file that has the word passport or confidential in it, as two
Oh,
examples.
really? Oh, so people who were just logging on the library just to maybe update their like passport information, they were pulling it straight off. That's pretty
Yeah,
nuts, actually.
it seems like, yeah. So that was the other 40%, and yeah, they're still identifying the full nature of all the data that was taken and working with the ICO so they can tell everyone, hey, his data got stolen. Here's why that's
Mhm.
important. Here's what we can do to kind of help you, um, or advise you at least. And so that makes up the two different bits of data that was stolen. I think it's quite impressive. They managed to kind of back up copies of 22 different databases and exfiltrate them. So they made their own backups, took that data elsewhere, and then exported out a different egress point. So
Mhm.
this is where I think the ransomware stuff looks fairly sophisticated from the because I believe that the Ricida offer some of these exfiltration options as well as just the encryption payload in their malware piece. So they're focused on encryption payload and also the data exfiltration.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I suppose, like they say, they don't think they're that mature as a ransomware group at the moment, but it does seem like they're fairly sophisticated in some of the
Scary.
techniques.
How the sophisticated ones must be like. Uh,
Yeah,
but,
they
but
don't
yeah,
miss.
yeah. So I mean, the Ricidia or Ricida, sorry, are known. I'll say it right once. Are known for defensive evasion, anti-forensics. We've already talked a lot about that. The the data that is the British Library have all of this data that's stolen in their backups. It hasn't. They say they've got everything that was taken, but they are struggling to put it back because the servers, the infrastructure, and the kind of software that was hosting all has been destroyed. So they have the data, but it's not active and ready to be used because they can't put it, install it again, essentially. Um, and that's that legacy piece we talked about, end of life, about these softwares come to the end of its life. It's not being supported anymore by the vendor. It's really vulnerable, but also it's really janky, right? It's really hard to piece these pieces together. The devs who are expert in it maybe retired by now, or maybe moved on to get new cloud certifications and
Yeah,
elsewhere.
yeah, that's true.
Almost at the end of this now. Payment, I mentioned before, but it's good to mention again. No payment. They say they didn't engage the criminals at all. I know
That's
we've
good.
had a ransomware negotiator on our podcast before, and
Mm.
he doesn't think you should pay either. But he also sometimes people bite the bullet and say they have to. Maybe things like healthcare when it's like people's lives are at stake. But fair
Mm.
play, taking the hard route, not giving them loads of money that they can then reinvest into making better ransomware. That's what we like to see. Um, and they want to know that that's the policy of any national institutions. That's what I like about this as well. They're saying, hey, we didn't talk to them, we're not going to pay, and none of us will. That's
Yeah,
stance you got to take. Otherwise, they'll keep coming at you.
yeah, that's true. And like you say, they reinvest it into making the ransomware family and the ransomware group a lot more sophisticated then, so it just becomes this flywheel effect of continuous breaches then, doesn't it?
They get it's I often imagine you watch Hercules when you were a child, or you've seen like
Oh yeah,
the Hydra
yeah.
chop off its head. Actually, that doesn't make sense. That makes more in the FBI takedowns where they kill one ransom operation, it pops up 3 other ones. But yeah, you basically, if you feed it, it gets more and more powerful. So you don't want to do that. Now, another commendation for the British Library. We'll talk a little bit about what they did in the crisis and recovery piece. And I'm not going to talk about how they rebuilt their servers. I think that's fairly standard. They are currently undergoing what they call this. What they call it rebuild and renew. So they're not just rebuilding what was there; they're going to rebuild it better and in more secure and more effective. Which is it's a great opportunity to do that, right? You might as well.
Yeah, that's true.
And they got that big sum of cash that we talked about, that £7 million from their reserves, which is almost half of their reserves. So money that they didn't want to be spending there, they probably could have spent earlier and had it cheaper. But hey, they're doing it now.
Yeah.
So fair play on that piece. But they contacted all the right people who are affected. They put out frequently asked questions for anybody who's concerned about their data. They could contact people via email and WhatsApp. So use a level of encrypted comms there when the breach was maybe ongoing. Although maybe WhatsApp isn't necessarily the best, but it's good enough. And people use WhatsApp, so that's easier.
Yeah.
And they delivered security lessons to all of their staff. So kind of like security awareness. Have you ever had to do that afterwards? Kind of sit down with somebody and say, hey, next time, here's what you should do, or maybe not. But
Often you're chatting with the employees, like you say. You start with obviously you don't say that it's their fault, or you can't put any blame anywhere. Sometimes it's not done out of malicious intent. It's just a mistake. So yeah, I've sat down with a few employees that we've jumped on a call. Sometimes just to make sure that their host is cleaned up. So you'll jump on and just check some of the folders and make sure that what we've done has actually worked. And sometimes resetting certain passwords that we can't do in an automated way that they've got to do locally. But yeah, you just have a chat with them and just say, if you do spot something similar again, just make sure that you raise it with us. That it doesn't impact us. If you raise one ticket, we can always close it out if there's nothing to look into. But yeah, there's been a couple of times I've spoken and had a chat with employees about it, and yeah, they usually go in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And it's there, not that blame culture, but hey, everyone, we can all get better at this. This is, we're not telling you this because we want to. We're telling you because we have to, because it does actually matter. And always, if you're in that situation, anyone listening, connecting the why they should do something to an impact, a real world impact that they can relate to. Maybe it's a phishing attack that they experienced, or an SMS attack, or maybe it's a story like this. Hey, the British Museum? Yeah, they got done too. Or maybe let's look at even Microsoft, right? Big corporation, loads of security stuff. Hey, they got compromised too, and loads of people's emails, business emails, got compromised as the result of it. It just shows you that, hey, look, it's not a blame game. This is everybody gets compromised, and we want to make sure we're doing the best things we can to call it out and avoid it as well. But last 2 sections, Andy. I've got the outcomes for the British Library. So I'm going to run through this. Basically, it ties off some of the problems we called out earlier. I'm going to read through them quickly. I want you to tell me which one you think has been the best lesson that people should maybe apply from what we saw, the problem versus now their solution. First one is moving to the cloud. The cloud stuff was pretty secure, so they're going to move more stuff into the cloud and have less technical debt there, and probably more agility. They accelerated their cybersecurity missions. They did have a kind of maturity plan that they were trying to go for, but is doing it slowly. Now they're doing it quickly. So they're looking at data loss prevention to stop the data slipping out, disaster recovery, improving that plan, and looking at more disaster recovery, and looking at business continuity. Those are the ones they called out. They didn't call out threat detection and response, which I thought was interesting, but maybe that fits under business continuity.
That makes sense.
The historically complex network topology that they call that, i.e. the shape of their network is how they explain it, and how they talk and connect to each other. The shape, I would suggest, is flat. They are now going to segment that. So they're going to make sure that next time if something does get compromised, they aren't going to be able to get all of our crown jewels. They might just get a little, one ruby and run off with it. That's what segmentation is all about, limiting that blast radius. The old applications that rely on kind of all the old technical debt, they're going to basically re-image, we all do all that and automate end-to-end workflows so the data transfer is a little bit more secure and it won't be kind of intercepted like it may have been done previously. And the final piece is I think their legacy infrastructure, all the technical debt has been the biggest contributor to the problem here. The fact they couldn't get the data for make the full assessments of what actually happened, and the fact that they probably don't have security controls that fit all those old stuff. I think that's probably why we see that
Yeah.
laptops did block it. I mean, yeah, blocking it, the end payload isn't great, but it's something. But the
Yeah.
servers didn't block anything because they probably only support some really old version of Symantec or McAfee, one of the OGs.
Yeah, that's true. And I think out of all of those, it's great to see that they've turned that around and they've come to the conclusion with all of those points. But I think I would say increasing, accelerating their cybersecurity mission and having that as a focal point. That
Mm-hmm.
it sounds as if they're going down the route where every employee needs that cybersecurity mindset, needs that kind of healthy sense of security paranoia. And I think that's probably a key takeaway there, that they were
Mm-hmm.
clearly thinking about cybersecurity policies. They knew where they wanted to go. They were already migrating over. They knew about their legacy systems. It wasn't unknown to them. They were thinking about it, but if they would have just accelerated that at an earlier time, then there's a chance they could have gotten away with it and not being breached. So that's probably the key takeaway there, is just accelerating your cybersecurity mission and making it a focal point of the business rather than maybe like second or third down the list because they want to increase profits. So, well, not in this case because they're not for profit, but just making it an important factor when you're discussing your business objectives.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you're talking to a security program and they say, "Oh yeah, we definitely need to do that. We see the value of doing that."
Mm.
The next thing they'll say yes, and then they'll think, "Yeah, but in 3 years, in 5 years, why not now?" That's the question you need to be asking. If there isn't a real good reason, it should be done now because you can connect it to the monetary cost of not doing these things and explain this is why you act right now. Whereas there are a few more specific stuff they're adding in. So around the third party controls, they realize the third parties were a big risk. So privilege access management to make sure that they have better control of third parties coming in and doing stuff in their environment. Obviously, enhanced MFA on all their systems on
Yeah,
premise. An integrated security suite that covers the whole organization, backed by security parts for improved instant response, detection, and remediation. That's what they call out the detection and response piece. And they want visibility across everything. That seems to be the theme now. You need to have visibility everywhere to kind of cross correlate these pieces. They also talk about resilient backups. Again, I'm not a fan of backups, but in the chat, we saw someone say, hey, about having them offline, and they call out they're going to have immutable air-gapped copies, off-site copies, and hot copies with multiple restoration points on a 4-3-2-1 model, being the number of days that they back them up. So, yep, listen, really good to see these kind of actionable bullet points that proves they're not just saying, yeah, we're going to do it better next time. They actually are looking at these, read them all out. Those are just the ones I think stood out to me, as well as getting rid of that flat network and having a defense in depth approach.
yeah, and I think migrating over to the cloud is always a good option, but again, they still need to have those best practices in place for the cloud. It's not going to
Good.
prevent everything.
Real good point, Andy, because that's something that they actually call out. This is a big report, and one of the sections is called Future Risk Assessment. And they said, even though we're going to do these things, we're now looking at what's going to be the next risks. And cloud, they did say cloud, although, yeah, it was great now, being in cloud does present different risks, right? If you don't know how to do cloud configurations or cloud access, then you might just get a different type of compromise further down the line. So great call out there.
Definitely.
Lastly, and thank you very much, chat, for the suggestions. I've seen one more. I want to ask the question. You've set them out with a good antivirus. We had some questions of people now saying, "Oh, you said some old antiviruses." I wouldn't say those are bad. I'm just saying those ones have been around for a long while. So they're probably using a really old version. We've linked in the chat, and if you want to know what the best antivirus is, those kind of things we think are great to use, school.com, empirical training, that's where you can find us and ask us these direct questions, and we can share our opinions. But AJ will probably tell you get 3 antiviruses, 3 EDRs, and stack them all together.
I don't know about that. That's it. That sounds like more like a salesperson talking. That does. You need to buy all of these and stack them up.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for buying this one. Did you know that you're still not secure?
Yeah, upsell this. but yeah, school. That's school with a K.
Oh yeah, good call out. School, because it's cool. And the last thing I want to call out is we have talked about how it's been great that they're sharing their what happened to them and the lessons that they've learned and kind of really connecting it to the actual realities of here's what's happened. And yes, some of it's a little bit embarrassing, but they were very happy. You know, they came out and said it, and I think that's really important. At the end, they then gave recommendations for other organizations in a similar sector or just the other organizations that they can go and apply. Now, there's nothing groundbreaking here. There's nothing like, wow, this is all new. We've never heard of this kind of recommendation before. It's all very standard cybersecurity practices. But that's kind of boring, but that's also kind of awesome because it means it reinforces the fact that we know what to do. We just don't always do it right. And so cybersecurity professionals can put you in a fantastic position that you never ever hit the headlines. You just have to listen to them, or you just have to make sure you are able to persuade the people with the purse strings, and hopefully they're getting more aware that this is the things they need to do, because they might not believe little old AJ, but they might believe the British Library and the NCA and all the other alphabet boys as they kind of advocate for these things.
Yeah, very true. Very, very
So
true.
the only ones that we haven't talked, they basically advise everything they're doing. They advise everyone else to do it. The other stuff that stood out was things like retain on-call external security expertise. So I think they're realizing, hey, when we saw there was an incident, it took us a while to actually get someone to support who really knew what was doing. Our IT infrastructure team aren't security experts. They even call out how their IT teams and security teams, which sounds like quite a small security team, were under-resourced and overstretched. And so that is part of the reason they said that kind of led to this. So having a managed security partner sounds like I'm selling it, Andy, but I think that always works. Augment your security team by having someone off-site. You know, let them worry about making sure they've already got the people 24/7, 365 for you, ready to go when you need them. Any Andy, any other recommendations you think that we haven't called out? I can see a few more here, but what do you think? If you think there's a lesson maybe we haven't focused on that could have helped them be in a better, more resilient security posture?
Well, in now moving into their new, in as a recommendation to move into, I think did they mention continuous training for employees, or was it just one-off training after the breach? I think that's
Yeah,
something.
that's kind of mentioned here. Yeah, training, is that your one?
Yeah, I would say regular training for employees, and not just like the boring training where you've just got to tick it off every single year. Just have interesting training about cybersecurity breaches and
Yeah,
teach people actually the cybersecurity best practices day to day, and make it interesting, like related to their specific job or even personal security as well, because that's something that I see that sometimes people get compromised on their personal devices and they've got company assets on those personal devices, and then attackers are like, oh, actually now I can pivot and take this and target the company that employee is working for. So yeah, regular training for employees, but interesting training, because we all well know that there's a lot of the training out there that is just tick box exercise. You skip to the quiz at the end and nobody's really listening to it. So sit
yeah.
people
What are
down,
they really?
yeah, sit people down and relate it to their job, and be
Yeah,
specific about the training.
maybe sit them down and tell them all about this breach, because there's plenty to go in.
Yeah,
I mean, I thought it was quite interesting. I actually enjoyed reading it initially. I was like, how am I going to get through this entire report? But the legacy stuff stood out for me, right? I think there is so much legacy software still out there. You know, years ago we had that big ransomware attack at the NHS, or the UK National Health Service. They had
yeah,
Windows XP that was running like their radiography machines, and they were like, "Well, you have to use it. It only works with Windows XP," but there was no patches for Windows XP. That's how the kind of that ransomware spread across all their pieces. Yeah, it just brings that back to light, that it's not okay to just leave them there and hope for the best and bury your sand and say, oh, it's too hard, because this is a lot harder. Rebuilding it now is a lot harder than it would have been to actually just rip off the band-aid there and then.
yeah,
It's one I think you'll love, Andy. Um, Proactively manage staff and user well-being. It says incident response plans need to also focus and include provisions for managing staff and user well-being. So I think it's like,
nice.
hey, yeah, we know what to do, but actually, if we've got someone working 24/7 for 7 days a week in a war room, you've
Mm.
been there. That leads to bad decisions as well.
Yeah, that's going to burn you out, isn't it? And I think that's a huge thing that we talk about, becoming a cybersecurity analyst, but even if you've got security analysts working for the company, but you're working them around the clock, then there's a chance they're going to start making mistakes, and you always need to let them have breaks and step away from the job. And like I said, come straight back to the start of the podcast where I say instant response can be extremely stressful. So after dealing with a breach at the scale of the British Library, you might even start to think that you're part of the problem because you didn't respond quick enough, and you start you start blaming yourself, and you need to, like you say, speak to the employees and speak to the instant response team and say, look, we did our best, this is where we need to improve. There's no specific problem for one individual, it's a team effort, and this process was broken and that's why this happened. So yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, Jigs, really like that one, because I don't often see that kind of called out when people are doing recommendations. They neglect that human element of this. But ultimately, humans are points of failure as well, and put it all on our shoulders. See, they do call out training a lot, and they call out the training, cyber expertise and awareness at senior level as well. So this isn't just a compliance tick box. This means you've got to get the top dogs in it as well. And I think that fosters a top-down cybersecurity community. You know, if you got the CEO coming in and be like, "Hey, who wants to hear about the phishing email or whatever?" Yeah. My CEO is always American. It shows who I've worked with for my time. And the last piece, so I haven't read all the recommendations. Hopefully we've given you a great insight into the key points of this and given our own opinion. But this is the one I want to end with, because I love this one. It says, collaborate with sector peers. Encourage collaboration and information sharing with sector peers to stay informed about common threats and best practices in cybersecurity. And I'd go beyond that. Also share what's going wrong. That's what they've done here. What's wrong. They share what your struggles is, your challenges, not so you can all be like, oh, everyone's struggling with that, it's no worries, but so you can maybe work together or kind of get some oomph to go and tackle these problems also. So thank you, British Library. I think that this has, for me, has felt like a little step forward in being more transparent with breaches. I would love to see this be a mandated process for any company that gets breached. They have to put out this over 20-page report like this. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but fully, I can feel like I've learned a lot just from reading this, even though there was nothing really new. And I'm definitely in all my engagements with customers, with security professionals, and so on, to connect things to real world impacts.
Yeah, most definitely. No, I second that, especially. So thanks again to the British Library for that report. And there's a lot of breaches that we'll read through, and you're kind of disappointed sometimes that they didn't go to the effort of this kind of effort when they're reporting the breach, because it's because when you get into cybersecurity and a breach occurs, you're generally interested to see exactly what happened. So it's always nice to see companies who write up a report and state exactly what happened, because at the end of the day, I'm just interested, and then I can read it and take some key takeaways. Like you said, there's even different industries as well can take takeaways from any breaches. So you said that you can work with peer mentors within the industry, so other companies in a similar business sector, but even businesses in different business sectors can still take away things from the report. But if a company just issues a report and it just says, yeah, we were breached, but it doesn't say anything, then it doesn't really help anyone then.
Yeah, and we share those in the community as well, and I get angry on those. So you'll see me every time I see one of those, I'll blame them. That's when you're getting blamed. I don't care if you did everything right. If you don't tell us, it's not helpful. And I want chat. If you want to, what was the biggest takeaway from this? Do you think what's the biggest recommendation? Main thing I'm seeing is the MFA. Seems to be this is hardware keys for login access. Yeah, like the Ubico key is a great one. I think we've done some videos on that before. Yeah, absolutely, MFA, and that's one of the best forms of MFA. So thank you very much, chat. Thank you very much, Andy, AJ, for joining us, giving us that instant response expertise. Thank you very much to the British Library for being transparent. I don't know if there's no names at the bottom of this paper that I can call out as the authors, but I think this is awesome. I'm going to encourage anyone to look at this and do follow this type of format. This has been the CyberSpace podcast from Empirical Training. You can find us again next week in all the places where you listen to your podcasts.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. That was a good one.
That's a wrap.
CyberSpace podcast.